Some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not? You ever heard that quote before? Anyway, this is an incredible story. After the funeral mass, the senator's body was transported by train from New York City to Washington, D.C. for burial in Arlington National Cemetery. After the funeral mass, Senator Kennedy's body was transported by train from New York City to Washington, D.C. for burial at Arlington National Cemetery. You'll have to see this. I'll get it to you before we go, I hope, or maybe afterwards. I want you to see this video. You couldn't believe at the scene. It's hard to even explain. The railroad tracks were just lined with thousands, hundreds of thousands of people from New York City to D.C. And as the train carried the body of Senator Kennedy to Washington, you just couldn't believe it. I mean, there were Boy Scout troops, there were soldiers, there were people crying, there were veterans saluting. It was the most unbelievable scene you'd ever see. It was much more dramatic even than what the president had gotten. I mean, all along these railroad tracks, all the way from New York City to Washington, D.C., people are just lined, paying respects to the fallen senator. It was incredible, and I'll show it to you on video. Once they got back to Washington, Robert Francis Kennedy was buried at 10 p.m. on June 8, 1968. Same day of his funeral, he was placed on a railroad car, taken from New York to Washington, then up to Arlington Cemetery, and was buried at 10 p.m. on June 8, 1968. About 30 yards away from his brother, the late President Kennedy. You obviously, at about 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, will be standing there. Isn't that kind of cool? You'll be standing right at his gravesite in 2 weeks. It is really cool. All he has at his gravesite is a simple white cross. And then there's a white marble headstone that just basically says Robert Francis Kennedy, birth and death. That's what he wanted. Very simple, simple setup. And that's what he has. You'd think he'd have some immaculate, eternal flame like his brother. Simple white cross. It's really, like Aaron said, really, it's kind of a cool thing to see. Well, after she buried her husband, Ethel Kennedy invited close family friends to her home for a cocktail party to try to get the healing process going. What's the creed of the Kennedy family? Please don't cry. She's trying to get back to normalcy. So after the burial, Ethel Kennedy invited close family friends to her home. They had a cocktail party. She wanted to get the healing process to begin. Now this is something some kids know and some don't. Robert Kennedy left behind his wife and 10 children. And Ethel was pregnant with the couple's 11th child, Rory. And you don't write these down, but I'm just going to give you the names of their kids. I think you'll get kind of a thought of. Here are Robert and Ethel's kids. Don't write them all down, just listen. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, who I have met. Matter of fact, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. Here's a picture of Kathleen Kennedy Townsend and myself right here. And I tell you what, she was the Lieutenant General of Maryland. We went over to visit her one year. When I walked in and saw her, all I saw was her father. God, she looks just like her dad. And in her office, she had the chair. The chair for her office was the chair that her dad used as Attorney General. And all these pictures that you see, like if your kids and stuff people put up, are pictures of like the Kennedy. It was incredible. She had letters from Hubert Humphrey, Lyndon Johnson. It was the most unbelievable thing, and she was just the nicest, calmest lady and answered our questions. It was one of the thrills of my life to see her. Very nice gal. Joseph Patrick Kennedy II, Robert Francis Kennedy Jr., David Anthony Kennedy, who is now deceased of a drug overdose, Mary Courtney Kennedy, Michael Lemoyne Kennedy, who's deceased also. He hit a tree skiing while playing football in Colorado.
Pardon the interruption, just a quick update on the first round game for our Lady Warriors. They were big winners this morning by a score of 58-37 by 21. So huge first win for the girls. They will play tomorrow, I believe, at 4:30.
Michael Lemoyne Kennedy died. He died in a skiing accident. Mary Carey Kennedy, Christopher George Kennedy, Matthew Maxwell Taylor Kennedy, Douglas Harriman Kennedy, and the unborn child of Robert and Ethel that was obviously later born was Rory Elizabeth Catherine Kennedy. Ironically, it was her wedding that John Kennedy Jr. was going to when he wrecked his airplane and killed himself, his wife, and his sister-in-law. You need to think about the irony of that. Two things you really need to know is Senator Kennedy's death will result in two significant changes in America. Okay, two significant changes. Two things are going to result because of his death that are changes. One, politically, and one still holds true today. The first thing I want to tell you is with his death, the Democratic nomination for president is going to be fragmented. The chances of the Democratic Party to win the election of 1968 become very diminished. It's going to be a huge advantage for the Republican Party because everybody was expecting Robert Kennedy to gain the nomination, and the Democrats, which we'll talk about later, really had to scramble for a candidate. They did not get a very good candidate, and it left the door open for Richard Nixon to become the next president of the United States. So that was one thing, one major effect of Robert Kennedy's assassination was it cost the Democratic Party, in my opinion and the historian's opinion, the election of 1968. The second thing he did, that still stands true today, is after his assassination, the Secret Service began to provide protection for presidential candidates, people running for president. Trump, Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, all these people that are running for president have Secret Service protection now because of this assassination of Robert Kennedy in 1968. The decision was made that that was going to be the case. Okay, going back a little bit, who was the man that shot and killed Senator Kennedy? He was a 24-year-old Palestinian by the name of Sirhan Sirhan. Okay, so the assassin caught right on the scene, a 24-year-old Palestinian by the name of Sirhan Sirhan. Okay, we'll finish up today with Sirhan's motivations, not very long. You know, why did he shoot Senator Kennedy? What was his reasoning? Was there a conspiracy? Were there people behind him? Those types of things. So Sirhan's motivations. Now, historians believe that Sirhan Sirhan shot Robert Kennedy for three reasons. There were three reasons they thought that he shot Robert Kennedy. Three reasons. One, Sirhan had a very anti-Americanism attitude. Sirhan had a very anti-American attitude. Anti-Americanism or American attitude. Okay, he's number two, he's a Palestinian, right? He's an Arab. Do we get along real well with the Palestinians? No. So Sirhan's Palestinian nationalism, being an Arab himself, was another reason why historians believe he shot Kennedy. And that doesn't make a lot of sense until you hear the third reason. What country in the Middle East has the United States always supported? Israel. And are they big buddies with Palestine? No, they're enemies. And so the third reason is that Sirhan was upset at Senator Kennedy because he had made some remarks in support of Israel during the campaign trail. Now, there was a war called the 6-Day War that had occurred in the Middle East between Palestine and Israel. And Sirhan, we're still on number three, Sirhan was upset at Senator Kennedy because he made remarks in support of Israel in that 6-Day War. That the Palestinians were incorrect, that the Palestinians were the ones that were on the offensive and being terroristic, so to speak. And Sirhan didn't like Kennedy's support of Israel concerning the 6-Day War, and that was the third reason why historians believe he shot him. Now, ironically, the date that Sirhan shot Robert Kennedy was a year to the date of the 6-Day War that was fought, obviously, a year earlier. So the date of Kennedy's assassination was on the first anniversary of the conflict known as the 6-Day War between Israel and Arab neighbors in Palestine. So it was kind of ironic that he shot him exactly 1 year later from the 6-Day War. that gives historians the thought that, you know, that was kind of a premeditated deal. Does that make sense? That he shot him a year after the Six-Day War. Now, they searched Sirhan's apartment and they found a diary. And this is what was written in a diary found at Sirhan's apartment. You have to write it down, just listen. It said, in his handwriting, "My determination to eliminate RFK is becoming more and more an unshakable obsession. RFK must die. RFK must be killed. Robert F. Kennedy must be assassinated. Robert F. Kennedy must be assassinated before 5 June 1968. That was found in Sirhan's diary where he was living. Okay? Kind of throws to me the conspiracy theory out, although there are people that still would like to tell you there was a conspiracy in this assassination too. Now, George Plimpton, you remember one of the guys that subdued Sirhan after the shooting? They asked for a comment about what was Sirhan's demeanor after he and Rosie Greer and Rayford Johnson subdued him. This was George Plimpton's description of Sirhan. He said, unusually calm, peaceful, or dreamlike expression on his face amid all the terror and confusion. That's how George Plimpton described Sirhan after they had apprehended him after he shot Senator Kennedy. Unusually calm, peaceful, or dreamlike expression on his face amid all the terror and confusion. Now, Sirhan was easily convicted, sentenced to death in California. However, the Supreme Court, and we'll talk about this later, overruled the death penalty in California. And when they did that, people like he and the Manson family, you'll talk about them, their sentences were commuted to life rather than the death penalty, because that Supreme Court hearing changed that. Now, at his first parole hearing, and when you're in prison a while, you get to go to a parole hearing.
Wait, so he got the death sentence?
Mm-hmm. And then it was overturned when the Supreme Court ruled in California that the death penalty was unconstitutional. Now, he went to his first parole hearing after serving a period of time in prison. And at the parole hearing, he claimed he acted unconsciously, that he really had no memory of the shooting at all. No memory of the shooting at all. And he claimed, he didn't claim, but his claim that he had no memory led speculation that he had been under the influence of hypnotic brainwashing. Have you ever seen the movie The Manchurian Candidate? Has anybody seen that? Denzel Washington is in it, and basically what it's about is someone putting a chip in a presidential candidate's head and then having the government control this person, and he does things that he shouldn't do and then doesn't remember it, okay? Well, that movie came out, 10 years ago. But there was an old movie called The Manchurian Candidate that came out in the 70s. And it was kind of the same thing, and this other one was a spin-off. But what they were saying is that somehow somebody had gotten, the CIA or somebody had gotten to Sirhan and made him a Manchurian Candidate, someone that they had placed brain-altering mechanism in his head and then controlled him like you'd control a robot. Really, it was not very legitimate, but it was speculated when he acted so strange at his first parole hearing. Who knows? I know. No question. Now, this is an interesting comment we're going to quit on today, and I'm going to show you a little video. An author by the name of Loren Coleman stated when he was talking about the assassination of Robert Kennedy on June 5th, 1968, he referred to that assassination as the first act of Arab terrorism to take place on American soil. What's a big thing now? Terrorism, is it not? We talk about the Twin Towers, we talk about the Pentagon. Author Loren Coleman, shortly after Robert Kennedy's assassination, stated that it was his belief that this assassination, was the first act of Arab terrorism to take place on American soil. Anyway, we'll quit with that today. I'm going to show you a short video when we get back Tuesday. on the assassination of Robert Kennedy, and we'll go through that a little bit, and then we'll finish up Tuesday with the profile of Bobby Kennedy, and we'll have our test Wednesday. I know this was probably a little different, only having about 9 kids in here, but it'll certainly get a video out for those that are gone so they can pick this stuff up, okay? All right, you can have the rest of the period to visit whatever you'd like.